Now, reservation has existed in our society since the last many decades. Over the last many years, reservation has been used as a tool to garner more and more votes rather than to serve the unprivileged.
More reservation and more welfare schemes. It's become a political lightning rod.
The age-old caste system of India is responsible for the origination of the reservation system in the country.
अब कुछ लोगों का ये भी कहना है कि जो जुल्म है वो तो हमारे पूर्वजों ने किया, तो हम क्यों भुगते?
Why is it so important? When was it last done in India? And has it delivered in the past?
Whenever a particular section, a group of society, or a class of society needs to be appeased, needs to be wooed, reservation is granted to them in one way or the other. And if we look at the issue very broadly, in a broad sense, and in a futuristic way, eventually there will be a time where every section of the society would want reservation or would want benefits of the reservation. And eventually, the governments will try to give reservation to all sections of the society as well, in one form or the other, to appease them. And thereby, there will be a time where there will be 100% reservation. And eventually it will negate the whole idea, the whole concept and whole purpose of reservation in itself, that is to serve the underprivileged, serve the backward class, serve those classes who have been basically subjugated historically. One such reservation which we'll be talking about today is the reservation for locals in the private sector. Now, we are used to listening about reservation in government jobs, in promotions, or in government schools, colleges, or in other spheres. But now we are talking about the reservation in private sector. See, because in all the other sectors, in government sectors, in public employment, reservation in a way has achieved its peak. It can't go beyond a certain extent. So which sector is left? Definitely the private sector is left. So now the governments are aiming towards private sector to provide reservation to certain sections of population in that particular sector, in those private sector jobs. So recently, in July 2024, Karnataka government came up with a very controversial bill. That bill was aiming to provide reservation to locals in the private sector in that particular state, which means it would be providing domicile-based reservation for private sector in Karnataka. Now, this bill definitely, as expected, caused a lot of uproar and criticism from all the quarters of the society, whether it be politicians, academicians, experts, entrepreneurs, startups. There are a lot of sections who criticized this particular bill. Now, what is this debate around outsiders versus locals? Should locals get reservation in the private sector in their own state? And if yes, then what are the implications of such a step? What are the positives? What are the negatives of such a step? And what should be the possible solutions? What should be the possible way forward? All these things we'll be trying to understand in this particular session. Hello, my name is Preetpal Singh, and today's topic is reservation for locals in the private sector.
Are jobs in Karnataka meant for Kannadigas only?
But right now, it's making news for an anti-business move. A job quota in the private sector. For whom? Kannadigas.
Karnataka has been in the eye of a storm this past week over a contentious bill that proposes job reservations for locals in the private sector.
The first question which might pop up in your mind is that, is Karnataka government the first government in our country to do so or to take such a step? The answer is absolutely not. In 2008, Maharashtra government also did something like this. In 2019, Andhra Pradesh government also came up with such type of bill. And in 2020, Haryana government also came up with such a bill. And in 2024, Karnataka government also came up with a bill reserving jobs for locals in the private sector in that particular state.
It's the fastest growing tech hub, a city leading in IT innovation, a hotspot for VCs.
India's beloved tech city, Bengaluru. Now, the city ranks second after Beijing on the list of top technology hubs in the Asia-Pacific region.
For many years, Bengaluru is number one in India's innovation index. It is an inclusive city.
To many, the future of technology doesn't lie in Silicon Valley, but in places like Bangalore. Recent evidence suggests that this is already happening, as emerging economies like India's make up almost 60% of global GDP.
So this is not new. This precedent has been set a long back. Now, another logical question which might come up in our mind is that why are these states coming up with such a law? What is the rationale and what do they want to achieve with this particular law? Now, to understand this reason, we have to understand broadly the problem, the economic situation of the whole country, the problem which is there in the economy of the whole country. And that problem is in relation to unemployment, is in relation to inequality, and is in relation to rampant poverty existing in our society. Now, according to the Center for Monitoring Indian Economy, unemployment rate in our country is as high as 7.5% as of 2024. And we see youth unemployment, it is as high as 20% in our country, which shows that youth in our country are unemployed. And even if they are employed in a particular sector, in most of the cases, they are underemployed because they are not having any skills, they are not having requisite industry level skills, so they remain underemployed. So that is the situation of unemployment. And we see inequality. Again, the World Inequality Lab, it came up with a report recently, and that report suggested that close to 1% population in our country, the richest 1%, they own more than 40% of our national wealth. So inequality, income inequality, wealth inequality in our society, it has been increasing since the year 2000. Now, in the backdrop of such high levels of unemployment, such high levels of inequality, and such high levels of poverty in our country, what would the middle class want? Definitely the middle class would want that these situations are eased for them, because who is basically facing the brunt of all these things? The middle class. The middle class is most hit by the levels of unemployment. Middle class is most hit by the levels of inflation. Middle class is most hit if there is inequality in the society, because middle class won't be able to afford the food, won't be able to afford the essentials, and they are not having requisite good paying jobs as well. So in this case, what do the states do? The states provide a reservation for the locals, that is the son of the soil of their particular state, and they provide reservation for them in the private sector. Now, if we see this particular issue from national perspective or from a broader perspective, it can have a very large ramifications, very large implications for the whole national unity and integrity. But if we see from the perspective of the state, what do states want? State wants their locals to be employed. State wants that their locals should not be unemployed. They should be earning salaries, earning good income, so that their lifestyle changes, their living expectancy increases, their life expectancy increases, and their living standards also rise. And also state governments say that by doing this, they are basically protecting the right to livelihood of their population. And also they are addressing the resentment of locals against the migrants who are coming from the other states. The proponents of reservation in the private sector argue that it is logical for a state to ask its private sector to reserve the job for locals. Because what are the private sector using? Private sector are using the resources of that local area itself. That is what many people who are supporting this, they argue. And also they argue that local job reservation is required for social equality in our country and in that particular state. So for establishing social equality, it is very much essential. And also they argue that proportion of public sector jobs is very less compared to the private sector jobs. So in private sector also, locals must be promoted. Now the intent behind this, from the state's perspective, is definitely to ensure that the people in that particular state, they get a job. They earn a livelihood, they support their family, and their living standard increases. But what about the unity and integrity of the whole country? What about the oneness of our nation? And aren't these steps or aren't these laws basically leading to economic fragmentation in our country? Or aren't these steps dividing our country and promoting the sense of regionalism in our country? So then the logical question is, what should be the way forward? What needs to be done? See, sometimes we fail to see the bigger picture and we are more focused on smaller segments. But the question is, shouldn't the states be concerned about the people whom they are governing? Definitely yes. And also, shouldn't they take steps to provide jobs to their locals? Definitely yes. But reservation for locals in private sector, is it the right way to do so? That is the question which we'll be trying to answer. For that, we need to analyze this issue very properly and we need to discuss on it in a very, very broad way. Now, the highly controversial Karnataka Employment, Local Industries Factories Establishment Bill of 2024, it basically mandated the private sector to reserve close to 50% jobs in the management position for the locals and 75% jobs for non-management positions for the particular locals in that state. But after the release of this particular bill, there was a lot of backlash, there was a lot of criticism, and then this bill was rolled back by the government. The IT industry, which is valued at close to $245 billion, is home to a lot of multinational companies like Google, Infosys, and others. And it is seeing influx of a lot of Indians from other states as well, which is leaving less employment opportunities for the locals. We are a pro-Kannada government. Our priority is to look after the Kannadigas. That is what Chief Minister of Karnataka said. These are the words of Chief Minister of Karnataka, that they are more focused on Kannadigas. But again, what we are questioning here is that if they are focusing on the local sector, on the locals, then what about the national integrity? What about the national unity? That is the question which we are trying to answer here. Now in Andhra Pradesh also, in 2019, a bill came reserving 75% of the jobs for the locals. And in 2020, this bill went to the Andhra Pradesh High Court And the High Court said that this bill may be unconstitutional. Now in 2020 also, Haryana government came up with such reservation bill, whereby 75% of the jobs paying up to 30,000 a month in Haryana would be reserved for the locals. Now the case went to Punjab and Haryana High Court, and they said that states cannot discriminate against individuals on account of the fact that they belong to a different state. That is what Punjab and Haryana High Court remarked. The Haryana government then moved the Honorable Supreme Court against this High Court order. Now, looking at this issue from constitutional perspective, many people are arguing that if we see the Article 16 Clause 4, government can definitely through affirmative action provide reservation for unrepresented sections in the society. However, if we closely look at Article 16 subclause 4, it is clearly written that nothing in this article shall prevent the state from making any provision for the reservation of appointments or posts in favor of any backward class of citizens, which in the opinion of states is not adequately represented in services under the state. Now this word is very important, services under the state. Now here the services under the state means public employment and not the private sector. That if we see very closely, we'll be able to understand this. Now, since we're talking about constitutional provisions, there is one more thing which we need to know about this particular issue. Now, in the historical and remarkable Indira Sahni versus Union of India case 1992, the Honorable Supreme Court of India upheld the concept of reservation for the backward classes in our country in public employment, but they also placed a cap of 50% on such reservations and excluded the creamy layer. Now, this case primarily dealt with the public sector employment, but important principles for affirmative actions were also laid in this particular judgment. So here we are talking about public employment, not the private sector. Also in Nagaraj versus Union of India case 2006, the Supreme Court reiterated that reservations should not breach that 50% limit which is set in the year 1992. But when we talk about the private sector, it is very hard to digest that the state governments are coming up with the reservation in the private sector as well. Now, till now, we are able to understand that what this issue is all about, what is the rationale from the perspective of the government for introduction of these type of laws, and why do they want to come up with these type of laws, and what are the various constitutional provisions. Now, let us try to understand that what are the problems with these laws, what are the major criticisms against these laws, and also what will be the possible way forward. Now, you all must have heard of NASSCOM, a non-profit association of the businesses of the IT industry. Now, it is the apex body for the $245 billion tech industry in our country. And it said that, and NASSCOM remarked that it is deeply disappointing to see this particular bill, and it will not only hamper the growth of the industry, but also it will impact the jobs and the global brand of that state. Now, NASSCOM members are seriously concerned about this particular issue, and they urge the state government to withdraw this particular bill. That is what NASSCOM had to say about it. Now, the criticisms, if we see objectively, can be divided under 4 different pillars. First pillar is regarding national unity. Second pillar is regarding regional disparities. Third pillar is regarding economic inefficiencies. And fourth pillar is regarding investment deterrence. Now, in relation to national unity, many experts have argued that these type of bills or these type of laws, they promote regionalism in our country and divisive forces in our country. Now, what if Tamil Nadu also comes up with this law, or Maharashtra comes up with this law, or Punjab, Haryana, Jammu and Kashmir, northeastern states, all the states come up with the law reserving the job for the locals? Then what about the national integrity? What about the national unity? What about the interstate mobility? What about the social mobility in our country? It will all go for a toss. The whole idea of unity and integrity of our country, for which our freedom fighters fought for, will all be lost. The unity for which Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel fought and worked so hard will again also go up for a toss. Eventually, if all the states come up with these type of laws, unity and integrity would just be a joke, would just be words in some book, in some textbook, which is why people argue that this bill or these laws can harm the national integrity and unity of a country. Now coming to the second pillar, that is promotion of regional disparities. Now, let's say jobs are reserved. For example, Karnataka. Karnataka is the IT hub of our country. It is the Silicon Valley in our country. Now, let's say if jobs are reserved for locals in that particular IT hub, IT industry, don't you think it will bring regional disparity? If there are no jobs in northeastern states, let's say northeastern states, they are not very tech savvy. Or let's say IT industry is not very developed in Assam, Meghalaya, Manipur, or let's say any other state. Now, what you are trying to say here is that people from northeastern region, they can't come to Karnataka. They can't work in Karnataka. definitely it will hamper the unity of our country also, but also the economic growth of our country. And eventually it will lead to regional disparity. It will also affect the overall economic growth of our country in many, many ways. So in relation to this also, these kind of laws are leading to regional disparities and promoting regional disparities in our country. Now coming to the third pillar, that is economic inefficiency. Now these kind of reservations can definitely lead to a mismatch between the job requirements and the available skills of the locals. It will also reduce the productivity and also reduce the innovations in businesses in that particular state. And many experts argue that these kind of reservations would kill meritocracy in our country and will only give rise to more and more reservations rather than meritocracy. And eventually it will lead to economic inefficiency. Now the fourth pillar is investment deterrence. Now you tell me very sincerely and very honestly, if any state comes up with these harsh laws, these stringent laws in relation to the local job reservation, do you think foreign investors or investors from the other state would be willing to invest in that particular state which is coming up with these laws? Definitely the answer is low. So states are basically harming themselves only if they are coming up with these type of laws, because investment deterrence will be there. And eventually what they were wanting to do, they were wanting to prosper the economy of the state, providing more opportunities for the people of the state. It will lead to the opposite thing. Economic development in that state will be reduced rather than getting increased. Now, however, the main question here is that if not this reservation, then what does the state do? State wants to solve the unemployment situation. States want to take measures to enhance the living standards of their people. They want to increase the income of their people, income of the locals also. So what should the states do to solve these situations if they do not go for the reservation of the locals in the private sector? Now, first and foremost change which each state should fundamentally do is change the nature of education in our country. And I'm not talking about the college education or higher secondary education. I'm talking about primary education and secondary education. You should change the way education is imparted. Currently, education is examination based. It is not learning based. So learning-based education, skill-based education and application-based education is the way forward. See, many students, you must have also seen that they do not know what to do of the maths formulas which they learned in their class 10th. What to do of the maths formulas which they learned in their 11th class. Eventually, what is their use? What is the application? They are clueless. They are not aware. So rather than following the model of rote learning, all the states should empower their students to learn for a better living, to learn for earning a better livelihood. I am very sure that the aspects of finance which we learn in our late 20s or in our early 30s, they are not taught in our school. Definitely not in the school where I studied. So if they are not being taught in the school and they are useful for our overall life, then why should we not include them as a part of our curriculum so that people are better off, students are better off when they are taking a decision about their career? They are having the skills which are required by the industry also. First and foremost solution is to reform the education sector, and that too the primary and the secondary education sector in our country, and for that particular state specifically. Also, definitely it will give long-term dividends. In the short term, it won't be of much use because it will take 10 years, 20 years, 30 years to see the dividend of this particular step. But the dividend will be very, very great, will be very, very good. Now, the second thing which the states can do is to promote the entrepreneurship culture in their particular state. Promote job opportunities in startups, giving them mentorship, giving them venture capital funds, providing them resources, providing them funding. All the other support ecosystem, plug and play ecosystem should be provided to the startups in that particular state. We all remember the case study of Tata, Gujarat and West Bengal. In that also what we see that one state was trying very, very hard that the multinational companies should come into their state. So they are giving them incentives, they are giving them tax breaks, they are giving them funding, they are giving them all set of other resources as well. Special economic zones also were made, right? So if these kind of opportunities are taken by the states, are utilized by the states, and eventually the jobs are provided to the locals, then that will be a great way forward. Rather than just with the law coming up with a reservation for locals in the private sector. That is a very easy thing to do, and that is very detrimental thing to do also. But if you want to fundamentally change and make the locals deserving of the jobs, then we need to fundamentally change the overall ecosystem, the overall business landscape in that particular state. So in a way, the government should be attracting the businesses, should be attracting the startups to their own particular state, rather than making it mandatory for them to hire the locals. The government should be showcasing to those companies that our locals, the people in our state, are deserving. People in our state are skilled. They're having requisite skills and they're having requisite educational qualifications as well. So rather than forcing, basically what should be done is promotion or encouraging. Now, eventually, the Honorable Supreme Court of India should also lay guidelines in relation to the reservation for jobs in the private sector, because it is much needed. And also, greater consultations and deliberations should be done by the state governments if they are coming up with any such law. And finally, each and every stakeholder in this picture should work towards the ambition of achieving Ek Bharat Shresth Bharat for our developed India by the year 2047, rather than being stuck in the narrow parochial view of regionalism and reservation in private sector. I hope you gained some new perspective from this particular section. Do let me know what are your views surrounding this particular issue in the comments. I'll be very happy to read them. All the very best and have a great day.